Hey, you might have seen my last video about hosting. In this one, we're going to talk about databases. Yeah, I know, exciting, right? Well, you need to store your data somewhere, right? What a better place to store them than a database. So in this video, we're going to take about 10 minutes to cover relational and document databases, the different types, and different hosting providers. Just some. There are hundreds, so we'll touch on a few of them. Ready? Let's get started. All right, let's take a look at databases. So relational and document. You may be thinking, wait, what? There's so many more types. Or maybe, there are. There's a graph database. There's a vertex database. There's a geo database, right? Yes, but relational and document databases are the most common databases that you're going to be using. So we're going to talk about these two. And if there's any interest, I can also expand on some of the other ones. I have also experience with Neo4j, which is a graph database. Very cool graph database. But relational and document are probably what you're going to be using, especially if you choose to go with Postgres, because Postgres has so many plugins and extensions that you can turn it into anything. SQL Server is Microsoft's SQL database, and MySQL is MySQL. It's another type of SQL database. Postgres, free and open source. You can download it, you can install it, you can self-host it. There's no license you need to worry about with SQL Server. MySQL, the same thing. Slightly, I would say, less common nowadays. It used to be very common 15 years ago. And SQL Server, very common if you're using .NET. If you're coding in .NET, it's likely that you're going to be using SQL Server, but you could also be using Postgres as well. So these are all SQL databases, all relational types of databases. There are more. These are the three most popular that you're going to see in the wild. So given that you've chosen one of these three databases, now you have to choose whether you want it managed or you want to self-host it. Depending on the product you're building, you may need to self-host it, right? If you're building an on-prem server that doesn't have internet connectivity, well, you're going to be self-hosting. So you're probably going to do a Postgres. You're going to install it on the server in a container, and you don't have a choice. But if you watched the previous hosting video, you'll know that there are two options for hosting. You can self-host it in the VPS, which is also where you would self-host one of these databases, or you could have it managed for you. So there are services which sell you compute and database infrastructure. Let's take a look at some of these. These services, there are a lot of them. Okay, so I listed just a few here, but there are dozens of reputable, popular, big services that offer managed databases. So, for example, PlanetScale, very popular, offers a managed MySQL database. Lesser known, Neon offers a managed Postgres database. Azure SQL, since Azure is Microsoft's cloud, they offer managed SQL Server. So if you chose one of these, now you have three options here, these top three you can choose from. There are also Supabase. Supabase is kind of like a backend for your service, for whatever you're building for your product. So they have authentication, file storage, database, which is Postgres based, role level security, stuff like that. It's very powerful, very, very cool. Similar to Firebase, which we'll discuss in the document database section. So Supabase is another option. And of course, the behemoth, Amazon RDS, So you can choose one of these. You could also just Google manage relational databases, and I'm sure you'll come up with tons of options because there are a lot. I would recommend not self-hosting if possible. You can. It depends. It really depends on the scenario, right? But if you're building a web application, don't try to manage your database, especially if you're trying to ship quickly. Like if you're trying to get a product out the door, get the investors happy, just use one of these, right? Like they all have free tiers. Well, actually PlanetScale I think doesn't anymore, but like Neon has a free tier. Supabase has a free tier. Azure SQL, I think, and Amazon RDS have a free trial, something like that. So you can use these even in production until you grow. Personally, if you're asking me, what would you recommend? I would say start with Neon. It's Postgres. It's just Postgres. So if you want to go somewhere else, you want to go Supabase. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, but you can migrate data very easily. You do an export and you do an import. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for these other ones. But if you've chosen Postgres because it's free and open source, Neon's a good option. Of course, it's not free Neon. I mean, you have to pay eventually as you grow. But at least it's Postgres, and you can move your data off later. Maybe you want to host it inside an Amazon RDS Postgres instance later because it's cheaper. You can do that. So managed relational databases, highly do recommend. If you want to self-host, you can use Postgres or MySQL. I would recommend Postgres in this case for self-hosting. But yeah, so that's relational. Now document. It's a bit of a different flow here. We're gonna talk about whether you want to manage or self-host first before we talk about technologies. So you can self-host some document databases, but not many. And the ones you can self-host are called quote-unquote community editions. And while they are serviceable, if you're serious about your business and if you want to get to market quickly, you're probably gonna, and it's a web application that's accessible on the internet, you're probably gonna be doing a managed. So what are some of the options here? MongoDB, it's the, not OG. I mean, there were document databases before Mongo, but Mongo kind of popularized document databases. So these are managed. I think Mongo you can also download and install. You can self-host it. DynamoDB, so this is Amazon's database, document database. Cosmos, this is on Azure. Firestore, which is on GCP, or Firebase, if you've heard of that, Google's cloud. And this is actually one of my favorites, Redis JSON. I know there's a lot of bad press around Redis Cloud recently, but the Redis JSON module has come a long way since its inception, and it goes really well with Redis search, which is, it's very, very fast. It's kind of in memory, hard, like SSD backed in memory. It's super, super fast. Very cool. Not as powerful as some of these other stores, but depending on your data, you may want to consider using Redis JSON for your data. Again, if it's not relational, remember these are all document databases, right? So these are some of the options. There are tons of other options. Also, highly encourage you to Google. I just gave some examples here, but yeah, this is kind of so we're looking at, databases, relational or not. Now, if you're looking at a graph database, you could look at Neo4j, or Cosmos DB actually also has a graph version. I believe, obviously Amazon must have graph. I'm not really sure what it's called. I'm sure it exists because Amazon has like everything on AWS, right? So again, recap. If you're just starting out your business, figure out, is your data relational? Is it not? If it is relational, choose your technology stack. If you're going with .NET, you may consider SQL Server or Postgres. Let's say you've chosen Postgres because you're writing in Python or JavaScript or whatever. Then you choose a provider. I'm partial to Neon, but it's up to you. Supabase also quite good. If you've chosen, if you think your data is they're more like documents and they don't relate, or maybe they have light relationships, right? Like an organization has, I don't know, users. Okay, that's a very light. But if you're not going to be doing any joins or anything like that, document databases are just fine, and they're excellent. So yeah, that's kind of where we are with databases. So next, we're going to take a look at authentication. So check that out.